Chapter 1. A Weary Traveler. The rain pounded against the windshield as John's battered old car sputtered down the deserted highway. He'd been driving for hours, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and the troubles he'd left behind. The sky was shrouded in thick, dark clouds, and the world seemed to have surrendered to the relentless storm. As the hours passed, fatigue gnawed at John's bones. The flickering neon sign of a motel up ahead offered a beacon of hope in the desolate night. It read, "The Desolation in Vacancy." Gripping the steering wheel tightly, he steered the car into the motel's gravel parking lot. The inn stood isolated, surrounded by a dense forest that loomed ominously in the darkness. Its exterior looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in years, with peeling paint and cracked windows. John grabbed his duffel bag from the back seat and trudged towards the motel office, the rain soaking him to the bone. He entered a dimly lit room, the bell above the door jingling softly as he stepped in. The motel's manager, an elderly man with hollow eyes and a crooked smile, greeted him. "Welcome to the Desolation Inn," the manager said, his voice raspy. "Just one night, sir?" John nodded, suddenly wary of the eerie atmosphere. "Yes, just one night." The manager handed him an old-fashioned key, its metal cold to the touch. "Room 13. It's at the end of the corridor." John glanced at the key with unease but said nothing. He paid the fee in cash and made his way to room 13, passing doors that creaked and groaned as if in agony. Each room seemed to tell a story of decay and neglect. Chapter 2. Room 13. Room 13 was no exception to the inn's dismal ambience. The wallpaper peeled in grotesque patterns, and a single flickering bulb cast eerie shadows across the room. The bed looked like a relic from the past, its sagging mattress adorned with worn-out sheets. John was too exhausted to be picky. He locked the door, closed the tattered curtains, and collapsed onto the bed, clothes and all. The incessant drumming of rain against the window panes soon lulled him into a restless sleep. But sleep brought no peace to John that night. Instead, he was plagued by vivid nightmares, visions of shadowy figures lurking in the corners of his room, whispering eerie incantations that made his skin crawl. He jolted awake, drenched in cold sweat, his heart racing. As he lay there, the room seemed different. The walls appeared to close in on him, the shadows growing more sinister. He tried to dismiss it as lingering fear from his nightmares, but an unsettling feeling of being watched gnawed at him. With trembling hands, he reached for the bedside lamp and flicked it on. The room bathed in light, but it did little to dispel his unease. He realized with a shudder that the room's air was unusually cold, and his breath misted in the frigid atmosphere. Suddenly, the lamp flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Panic set in as he fumbled for his phone, but it was dead. The room was silent, save for the haunting echo of his own labored breathing. Chapter 3. An Uninvited Guest. As John lay there in the oppressive darkness, he heard something that chilled him to the bone, a soft, eerie whisper coming from the corner of the room. "John!" He strained his eyes in the pitch blackness but saw nothing. "Who's there?" he stammered, his voice quivering. "John, it's time to pay." The whisper seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. John's heart pounded in his chest as he scrambled to his feet and groped for the door. His fingers finally found the cold doorknob, and he flung the door open, stumbling out into the dimly lit corridor. The manager was there, waiting for him with that crooked smile. "Leaving so soon, sir?" John was breathless, his mind reeling from the bizarre encounter in his room. I don't know what's going on, but I need to leave." The manager nodded knowingly. "Of course, sir. But first, you must pay your dues." Dread tightened its grip on John as the manager held out his hand. In it was a coin, ancient and tarnished, with a mysterious symbol etched onto its surface. John took it, trembling. Take this coin and leave it in the forest behind the inn, the manager instructed. Only then will you be free of your debt. John's instincts screamed at him to run, but a paralyzing fear kept him rooted in place. Without another word, he turned and followed the manager's directions, venturing into the rain-soaked forest behind the inn. The woods were dense and foreboding, the trees seemingly twisted and contorted in unnatural shapes. As John trudged deeper into the woods, he felt a palpable malevolence in the air, as if the very forest resented his intrusion. At last, he found a clearing, and there, amidst the towering trees, was an ancient, gnarled oak. He approached it, his heart pounding, and placed the coin at its base. As soon as he did, a bone-chilling wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the sounds of the rain. A sinister laughter echoed through the woods, and John felt an overwhelming presence looming behind him. He turned, his blood running cold, and saw a shadowy figure emerging from the trees. Chapter 4: The Inn's Sinister Secret. The figure that emerged from the darkness was unlike anything John had ever seen. It was a grotesque fusion of man and tree, its limbs gnarled and twisted like the ancient oak. Its eyes, cold and soulless, fixed on John with malevolent intent. "Who are you?" John managed to stammer, his voice quaking. The figure's voice was a haunting whisper, echoing the words from the room. "I am the guardian of the Desolation Inn, the collector of debts." The guardian's skeletal hand extended towards John, and the coin he had placed at the tree's base levitated into its grasp. The symbol on the coin glowed with an ominous light, and John watched in horror as the guardian absorbed the coin into its twisted form. "You have paid your debt," the guardian intoned, its voice reverberating through the clearing. As soon as the words left its lips, the forest seemed to come alive with a cacophony of eerie sounds, the whispering of the wind, the rustling of unseen creatures, and the mournful cries of something far more sinister. John's heart raced as he turned and ran, sprinting through the woods, his footsteps drowned out by the malevolent chorus that pursued him. The inn loomed in the distance, a menacing presence against the backdrop of the stormy night. He burst through the door, panting and drenched, and slammed it shut behind him. The manager, still wearing that sinister smile, greeted him. "Did you pay your dues, sir?" John nodded, too terrified to speak. He staggered back to his room, the horrors of the forest still echoing in his mind. Chapter 5: A Never-Ending Night. The night wore on, and John lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that he was trapped in a never-ending nightmare. The room felt oppressive, the shadows dancing in sinister patterns on the walls. He tried to convince himself that it was all in his head, that the inn was nothing more than a dilapidated roadside motel. But then, as the clock on the nightstand ticked on, he heard it again, the soft, eerie whisper from the corner of the room. "John!" He turned his head slowly, his heart pounding, and saw a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness. It was the guardian from the forest, its eyes glowing with malevolence. "Your debt is not paid, John," it whispered, its voice sending shivers down his spine. "You will remain here, trapped in the endless night." Desperation gripped John as he fumbled for his phone, trying to call for help, but the device was dead, just as it had been before. He jumped out of bed, determined to confront the figure, but as he approached, it melted into the shadows, disappearing from sight. The room grew colder, the air thick with foreboding. John realized with growing dread that he was not alone. He could sense other shadowy figures lurking just beyond his vision, their presence suffocating. As the night stretched on, John's sanity began to unravel. He heard whispers, saw grotesque apparitions, and felt a malevolent force closing in around him. He had ventured into the desolation in seeking refuge, but now he was trapped in a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. Chapter 6: The Endless Horror. Days turned into weeks, and John remained trapped in the sinister confines of the Desolation Inn. He had long since lost track of time, and his mind had become a fractured mosaic of terror and despair. The inn's malevolent forces tormented him without respite, their haunting whispers driving him to the brink of madness. The room had become a prison, its walls closing in on him, the shadows twisting and contorting like living entities. He no longer slept, for his nightmares had become a relentless waking reality. The Guardian and its spectral cohorts were a constant presence, their hollow eyes watching his every move. One night, as he lay in his bed, a horrifying vision overtook him. He saw the inn's manager, his crooked smile stretching impossibly wide, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. The manager's voice echoed in his mind, taunting him. "Welcome to the Desolation Inn, John. You will never leave." The room seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, and John's scream of despair echoed through the inn's haunted corridors. Chapter 7: The Final Revelation. It was on one particularly nightmarish evening that John stumbled upon an old journal hidden beneath the bed, its pages filled with cryptic writings and ominous warnings. It spoke of a curse that had befallen the inn, a curse that bound its guests to an eternal night of torment. The journal revealed that the Guardian was the embodiment of the curse itself, a twisted entity that fed on the fear and despair of those unfortunate enough to stay at the Desolation Inn. It could not be defeated, only appeased with a sacrifice, a payment of a life for every night of suffering. John's heart sank as he realized the grim truth. He was trapped in a never-ending cycle of horror, his own life forfeit to the malevolent forces that plagued the inn. But John was not one to surrender without a fight. With newfound determination, he began to search for a way to break the curse, poring over the journal's cryptic passages and studying the inn's history. As he delved deeper into the inn's dark past, he discovered a hidden chamber beneath the building, a chamber that held the key to the curse's origin. Armed with this knowledge, he ventured into the depths of the inn, confronting the malevolent forces that sought to keep him imprisoned. Chapter 8: Breaking the Curse. In the hidden chamber, John found a long-forgotten ritual that could potentially break the curse. It required a sacrifice, but not of another innocent soul. Instead, it demanded a sacrifice of the inn itself, a ritual that would bind the malevolent forces within the inn, sealing them away forever. With trembling hands, John began the ritual, reciting incantations and drawing intricate symbols on the chamber's walls. The inn fought back, its walls shaking, its shadows writhing in protest, but John pressed on with unwavering resolve. As the ritual reached its climax, a blinding burst of light filled the chamber, and the inn's malevolent forces were drawn into the symbols on the walls, their agonized cries fading into nothingness. The curse was broken, and the inn fell silent. Chapter 9: Escape from the Desolation Inn. When John emerged from the hidden chamber, he found himself back in his room. But the room was no longer a prison of despair. The walls were no longer closing in, the shadows no longer whispered torment. With a sense of liberation, John gathered his belongings and made his way to the inn's office. The manager was nowhere to be found, and the inn itself seemed to have lost its malevolent aura. The storm outside had subsided, and the first light of dawn broke on the horizon. As John stepped out of the Desolation Inn, he felt the weight of his ordeal lift from his shoulders. He knew that he had broken the curse, and that no other weary traveler would fall victim to its horrors. With each step he took away from the inn, John vowed never to look back. The road ahead was uncertain, but he carried with him the knowledge that he had faced the darkest of nightmares and emerged victorious. The Desolation Inn would remain a chilling tale, a cautionary legend whispered among travelers, a place to be avoided at all costs. But for John, it was a harrowing chapter in his life, a nightmarish sojourn that had tested his strength and resolve, and ultimately led him to the light of a new day.